And so at this time, I would like to combine the attendance roll call with the approval of September minutes. First, can I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting? And please state your name and say so moved. And committee members, you're welcome to unmute yourself. I will need a motion and I need someone to second it.
Okay, this is Faye Senat, and I move approval of our previous meeting's minutes.
Thank you, Faye.
Second, Elliot.
Bye, Elliot, thank you. Great. Are there any questions from the members? Okay, if there are no questions, we will move now to roll call. So what we'll ask is now that when I read your names out loud, please respond present and your vote yay, nay, or abstain on the minutes when I call your name. And this will include the minutes from the September 8th meeting. So I will now do the roll call. All right, do we have Luli Blacksmith? Thomas Gary?
Present, aye.
Thank you. Blake Grisby? Daniel Hogman?
Danielle just joined.
Okay. Daniel Hogman, we're just now doing the roll call and approval of minutes. So I'll just need to say you're present and yay, nay, or abstain for the approval of the September 8th meeting minutes. Okay. Okay. Kevin Ivers?
Here, and I'll say yes.
Thank you. Renee Pattern?
Here, and approve minutes.
Thank you. Stephanie Pressler? Ruth Rosas? Oh, she just joined. Ben Rulig? Faye Senat?
Present, and
yeah.
I.
Perfect. And Zara Swatla?
Present, aye.
Perfect. Daniel, I'm just going to come back to you again.
And I vote aye also.
Thank you, Elliot.
Hey, sorry about that. Joined a little late. Present and yes, approved.
Thank you. Ruth? Ruth Rosas? Okay. All right, then we'll go back to Blake Grisby, Stephanie Pressler, and Ben Rulig. Okay, I do believe we have a quorum to approve the minutes. So we'll move on to the second item of business. So now the motion carries, and we'll now go into announcements for today. So I'm going to pass it over to Dustin to give a few announcements from the board meeting.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Great to see all of you have been able to join us today. We just have some kind of general CMAP announcements that we want to share with all of you, just to give you kind of an update on what the agency is doing kind of in regards to the ongoing pandemic and some of the impacts of that. So first off, CMAP assembled a regional economic recovery task force at the request of the region's 7 county board chairs in the city of Chicago. The task force is co-chaired by Aaron Alleman and Paul Goodrich, representing the city of Chicago's COVID-19 recovery task force and Choose Chicago. So CMAP brought together leaders from across Northeastern Illinois for a kickoff meeting in November to support a strong regional economic recovery. 3 working groups focused on economic development, workforce, and tourism met in early December and will continue to meet monthly to identify immediate and long-term actions for the region. And so really transportation is the thread that runs through each of these three areas. Economic development, it's where businesses choose to locate, workforce, how people get to the places they need to go, and tourism, how people get to the assets across our region. And by bringing together city and suburban leaders, experts, and advisors throughout the region, CBEP will help the region agree on priorities, collaborate on solutions, and speak as one collective voice. Additionally, I just want to share out some work we're doing on mobility recovery. So with considerable impacts to transit and the transportation system during COVID-19, CBEP is starting to work on a mobility recovery plan. We have been engaging with the Regional Transit Authority and our transit partners on what the future holds for transit, multimodal transportation, and our post-COVID transportation needs. So that project's going to be kicking off in January, and it's expected to be completed by fall of 2022. And then just a couple other items I want to share out. So we're doing some work on shared services as well. As the pandemic has continued to cut into revenue sources, more communities are looking at sharing services with their neighbors, and that's of course a recommendation of Onto 2050. So to help munis explore their options, we held a CMAP Talks webinar last month with municipal staff from Oswego, Buffalo Grove, and Berkeley to share the best practices they've seen in their communities. We'll also share a link out to the recording in the chat box if you'd like to watch or share that. And then finally, just tying things back to Onto 2050, our region's regional plan. An op-ed co-written by Aaron Alaman, our executive director, and Arnold Randall, the superintendent of the Cook County Forest Preserves, was published in Cranes a few weeks ago, promoting equitable access to parks. On that, only 25% of our region's residents live near parks and open space in some areas, while in more affluent areas, where over 50% have access to parks. And so Onto 2050 sets a regional goal of increasing access to parks to 65%. And that op-ed kind of outlines some of the work that's happening to make that happen. That's also something we can share in the chat box. And then finally, Aaron Alleman was also interviewed for a story in Cranes, along with Chairman Cronin from DuPage County and Representative Mayfield from Waukegan on the consolidation of government services, which was something that I know was on the ballot in a lot of places this fall. And that was also another Onto 2050 recommendation. So we'll plan on sharing the link to that article as well. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Dustin. And if you're wanting to find more information on any of those projects, we'd be happy to connect you with the project managers for those particular projects. So just let us know and we'll be happy to connect you. So now we'll move on to the next item, which is the proposed schedule for 2021. So we as liaisons have put together a schedule for 2021 that will still follow the same quarterly meeting schedule we followed in past years, which will be on the second Tuesday of the quarter from 2 to 3:30 p.m. So we just ask for your approval of these meetings. All meetings will continue on Zoom. So be sure to find the calendar or to look for the calendar invitations for that. But we are seeking approval from the committee on these dates. Okay. I don't hear disagreement with these dates.
Good.
No, let's do it.
Yep, works for me.
Perfect. Awesome. So again, we will be sending you all calendar invitations with these dates within the next week or so. All right, so now we'll move into today's presentations from staff. So today's meeting will focus on presentations that highlight CMAP's work in water resource management And moving forward, our goal is to have quarterly meetings focused on a theme that relates to the work CMAP staff is currently undergoing. So today we'll first hear from Margaret Sheeman on water affordability in Northeastern Illinois. So I'll now pass it over to you, Margaret.
Hi, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So hi, I am Margaret, and thanks for inviting me to speak to you today about our water affordability work and initiatives. So I'd like to start off with a little bit of background about this issue. So one of the things we've noticed as we've analyzed our water rate data is that here in the Chicago metropolitan region, what we see is that the majority of communities are actually experiencing water bill growth rates that exceed income growth rates. And this has been occurring over the past decade. The chart that you're seeing here shows a near doubling in real terms, so that's adjusted for inflation, of the water rate over the past 10 years. So some of the factors driving this increase include the need for water infrastructure investment and reinvestment needs, rising input costs, so the energy, chemicals, and labor that go into delivering and producing clean water and removing wastewater. We also see increasing regulatory burdens and traditional sources of subsidies and loans decreasing or becoming less stable. And so as our water bills continue to escalate, we really see the number of households that find their water bills unaffordable rising. So in a nutshell, the issue is really the conundrum between the need to price water appropriately to recover sufficient revenue to continue to run our systems on the one hand, and on the other hand, meeting the public health mission of the utility to provide safe, reliable water at fair and reasonable water rates. So one of the challenges we faced in our research is, of course, the large study geography of the CMAP region. And we did set out to analyze residential level water burden to better understand the scale and scope of water affordability challenges across the entire 7-county Northeastern Illinois region. As you may know, this region contains 284 municipalities, and within those municipalities, we have 245 community water suppliers. The vast majority of these systems are not publicly owned. And here in the state of Illinois, there's no state oversight of rate setting. So oversight of water rates for government-owned utilities does occur at the local level via board or council approval. In addition, these systems are highly diverse in terms of water supply source, which you see here, the majority of our communities being served by Lake Michigan water, but outlying communities by a combination of shallow and deep groundwater, as well as other source water. We also have a great diversity of communities in terms of other attributes such as density, land use, and socioeconomic characteristics. So the research objectives that we set out to meet include assessing what today's best methods are for determining and measuring water affordability, also to analyze and identify where in the greater Northeastern Illinois region water affordability is most of a concern. And then our hope is really to jumpstart a regional dialogue on best practices in addressing affordability for communities that need it most. So achieving water affordability depends critically on how we actually measure and define water affordability. The short answer to the question of what is water affordability is that it really depends who you ask. You're going to get as many answers to that question as people you ask. The longer answer is that the conversation about water affordability has been going on for decades. And so unfortunately, there's currently no one generally accepted definition of water affordability. The method that's used to measure water affordability really depends on the purpose of the assessment itself. So to help us grapple with that question, we conducted a review of the literature, and I'm providing a link to that report in this slide for those who would like to delve into that question more. So in the end, we ended up using several different methods to analyze water affordability. So the first method we use is looking at water costs as a % of median household income. The second method we used is looking at household water and wastewater costs as a % of income in the lowest earning quintile, and that was to really get at the most vulnerable in our communities. The third method was to use a water affordability matrix. That's a little complex, but basically we crosswalked the percent method with a poverty measure to get a more nuanced view of affordability. The fourth method we used is to look at the number of hours that a household would have to work to actually afford and pay their water bill. And then finally, we created an online dashboard that allows communities to place all of those metrics within a larger community context that includes other demographics. And so just a few of the key findings from our research. Our first key finding is that water affordability is an issue across the entire region. So it's not just an issue in communities that experience low median income. This figure shown here illustrates our water affordability matrix metric, which basically categorizes water affordability from low to high. The darker colors represent census tracts with a greater water burden. And almost half of all communities have a high burden census tract. And I'm seeing a message come through the chat. So just to explain that a little bit further, we're looking at the residential cost of water and wastewater bill. So it's purely residential water, not commercial or industrial water. And burden is defined as that household residential cost of water being more than 4.5% of the water bill. Our research, in terms of our second finding, our research also showed that water affordability is a nuanced issue. There's no one perfect water affordability metric. And so that really makes measuring and communicating water affordability a challenge. And so we did develop this online dashboard tool, and I'm providing a link to that tool here so that communities could go in and examine our multiple affordability metrics within the larger socioeconomic context. Third key finding is that just as there's no one perfect water affordability metric, there's no one size fits all perfect solution to address water affordability. We did map activities to different community characteristics. So one of the things we did was identifying actions fundamental to utility management that all communities can take. Beyond this, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, we have a variety of local solutions that can be tailored to meet the needs of specific communities. But we also recognize that more robust state and federal solutions will be necessary, particularly for communities that lack financial capacity to go at this issue alone. Our fourth major finding is that we found evidence of racial disparities in water burden. The figure you're looking at here maps the geographic distribution of water burden for majority white and non-white communities. And what we found is for majority white municipalities, only 23% contained a water burden census tract, where 62% of majority non-white communities did. So very much also an equity issue across our region. So how do we address water burden? So after we looked at how to measure and define water affordability, we also conducted a review of programs and policies that have been used across the nation to address water affordability. And I'm providing a link to the report as well if people are interested in taking a look at that. But I'll briefly summarize some of the lessons that we learned from this review. So the first, we took all these strategies and we put them into several buckets. And so the first bucket is addressing escalating water service costs, which of course is one way to make water bills more affordable. So some of the larger umbrella strategies to reduce water costs include asset management, increasing federal and state funding sources, and then exploring shared services and regionalization models for our communities. So when we're able to implement cost reduction while protecting the level of service, and by that I mean that we're not going to compromise water quality, water pressure, or customer service in order to do so, then all users of the water system really benefit from those management strategies. A second strategy we identified is water conservation. So similar to cost reduction, water efficiency is really one of those foundational utility management strategies we can use. So not only does conserving water resources decrease the water bill for customers, But at the utility level, for utilities near capacity, conservation can also reduce costs by delaying or deferring the need for costly infrastructure expansion. And so the report provides a full checklist of strategy recommendations for water conservation, such as leak detection and repair, to outreach and education campaigns. The third broad strategy that communities can use is to take steps to actually integrate social objectives such as water affordability into the rate itself. So actually involving the community in the rate design process. There's many types of rate design strategies that can be used to address water affordability. So from lifeline rates, which is providing an essential amount of water at a low cost for folks, through the whole list to connecting charges to property values. And again, there's a full checklist of those strategy recommendations that we include in the report for those that are interested in exploring them. The fourth strategy is really the largest bucket. So that involves all those things that utilities can do to strengthen and create customer assistance programs. Three big subcategories there are billing and collection. So those are policies that are aimed at making it easier for customers to pay bills on time, to avoid late payment penalties, to avoid water shutoffs, and also to help utilities prevent and minimize unpaid accounts. Also, bill discount programs can be used. So either a discount on the water or sewer bill, the entire bill, a % discount, so all kinds of things that can be done to provide a discount for customers who need it. And last but not least, crisis assistance, which is a short-term assistance for folks going through an emergency. I do want to emphasize this one because one of the things that we found that's most disturbing about this issue is that water service disconnection can lead to eviction or an uninhabitable residence. And so providing crisis assistance to avoid that is considered a critical component of a water affordability strategy. Strategy 5 gets at an issue that we've seen where water affordability programs I mentioned typically target owner occupiers. So folks who are directly receiving a bill for water. They can really be ineffective. A lot of the programs are ineffective in targeting households that don't directly pay for water, most obviously renters. And so providing assistance to the hard to reach community really requires a completely different set of strategies. Direct assistance can be used, for example, providing vouchers or discounts to landlords or tenants and mechanisms to ensure that those discounts are getting passed along to tenants. And indirect assistance is also important, and that involves the utility and landlords increasing knowledge of and partnering with other existing public assistance programs, such as financial counseling and other housing and energy assistance programs that can be used to address the entire financial situation that's happening. Third, targeted conservation programs. So targeting your water efficiency efforts to multifamily buildings specifically to help the folks who need it the most. So while all of this work in the literature review really provided us a overarching regional viewpoint and also kind of a laundry list of approaches that have been used by other communities in addressing water affordability, it was really beyond the scope of this work to look at community-specific on-the-ground situations or to address the effectiveness of programs in terms of meeting specific community targets, such as reducing shutoffs or reducing arrears or other goals that the community may have. And so we do need to do more work in this area to determine the effectiveness of specific water affordability programs in meeting specific targets. We are also working to provide community level assistance. So using our regional snapshot, getting more data from the community to implement water affordability programs. So 2 examples there is we've worked with Chicago on their utility billing relief program, which provides low-income residents with a reduced rate on their water, sewer, and water sewer tax, and also provides debt relief for people who demonstrate they can manage the bills for 1 year. We're also working with Evanston. So Evanston is currently exploring going to a tiered or increasing block rate that would include an affordability tier, and so we're working with them on that as well. And so to conclude, our water affordability research really represents a first step in identifying the extent of water burden and some strategies we can use. But again, we're really hoping to start a regional dialogue on this and get more feedback. And so here's a link to the final report, as well as the whole collection of resources that I mentioned. And thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. I haven't been monitoring the chat closely, but if there's time, I'm happy to take any questions as well.
I have a few that I wanted to throw out there. Number one, with regard to COVID, what has or has not been done, or what has been looked at all during the course of the study, as to what's been done to give to relief for people who are impacted, and what governmental policies have been implemented statewide or locally to deal with that. And let me just go on with a couple other things, then you can address them all. The other, I was just wondering what was looked at in terms of the differentiation, especially in those people who are using Lake Michigan water, based upon their suppliers. Many people get through Chicago, others through Evanston, and there may be other sources as well, and what impact that has had in terms of the differentiation of where the communities are buying their water from. And the last issue, just wanted to know about if there had been anything looked at as to the impact of the age of the system and the need for replacement, lead pipes and so forth that need to be replaced, which can have a major impact on the cost of delivery based upon those infrastructure needs.
Sure, thank you. So the first question regarding COVID. So we did do our work pre-COVID, but interestingly enough, the city of Chicago actually put a moratorium on water shutoff prior to COVID. And so that is one recommendation that we're making, is that during COVID, all utilities do not perform shutoffs. Because as I mentioned, this becomes a housing issue and a homelessness issue if your house becomes uninhabitable. And so the city of Chicago really led the way even pre-COVID with placing a moratorium on those shutoffs. Another issue that we've seen with COVID that we haven't worked with directly, but I know there's a webinar, I believe it's next week on this, but we've seen that this is more of an issue for on the commercial side, but with the reduction in demand of water, when the water is not running in schools or in commercial buildings, that we have the potential for disease such as Legionnaires to start developing in that pipe system. And so addressing the safety of turning the water back on is something that I know the Illinois section of the American Water Works Association is working on, and reaching out to communities to be aware of potential issues with water quality that happen when they've had a building that water has been shut off or been reduced and they're now turning it back on. But I'm definitely interested in hearing people's experiences with COVID and building on those recommendations. For the second question, with differentiation for Lake Michigan water suppliers, last year, or maybe it was 2019, there was a state bill passed, and someone on this call may actually know which state bill it is, but it was passed to do a water rate study to look at specifically pricing of Lake Michigan water and what are the factors driving that. That study is meant to be led by the University of Illinois Chicago Government Finance Research Center, as well as the Illinois State Water Survey. My understanding is that even though that bill has passed, appropriation for the funds to actually do that study has not been, those funds actually haven't been appropriated yet, so that work actually hasn't started yet. But hopefully that money will get appropriated and we will have a better understanding of how Lake Michigan water is being priced specifically through those Lake Michigan networks as it's being wholesaled to communities. I'm not sure that answers the question, but I think in a nutshell, we need more work to really understand how the water is being priced as it goes through that supply chain. And the third question, age of system. So in terms of replacement, I think IDNR has done a good job addressing this issue for Lake Michigan communities by including, by revising their leakage reduction targets in their Lake Michigan water permits. I think that was done back in 2016, 17, a few years ago. And basically what that does is it gives communities a timeline to reduce their water leakage. But it really has tightened up, not only provided free training to utilities on asset management and water auditing and leak detection, but also mandated that communities with a Lake Michigan water permit submit plans for meeting those water loss reduction targets. We don't have anything similar for groundwater communities, so that is currently something I think on the affordability side I mentioned that we recommend as a foundational action, that you don't want to be passing on the costs of failure to manage the infrastructure effectively to customers, right? You want to make sure you tighten up your own system first. And last but not least, lead. So there's so much going on this issue. It would probably be great for you guys to have a presentation on that actually. But I actually lost my water affordability project manager at Elevate Energy because they are launching a lead replacement program with the city of Chicago in the spring. And so she would be able to talk more about that than I, but that might be something that would be good for the committee to hear about in the future.
Yeah, I'm also
Thank
interested.
you very much. I want to say, I have to say how impressed I am with the fact that you have your finger on the pulse on all these issues. I mean, the fact that obviously there are a lot of things we need answers to, but the fact that you basically have a pretty good understanding across the board on these things. I thank you for your responses. I really do.
Second that, yeah, that was really good information. And it's just so encouraging to see that with our water, that there are resources out there for people. And like, there is actually ability for the city to stop people's water from getting shut off, like in comparison to our electrical, which ComEd has shut off over 9,000 people's power for issues with payment. And since those operating mechanisms are different, at least we have some more control to help people out with the water. And then like on the lead, I'm also very interested in hearing more about the lead. Like one basic question I have is like, should we be concerned about a bunch of trees being cut down? Because we already have a really poor urban canopy compared to other large cities in the US. So just wanted to also note that. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Margaret, we have a question in the chat. So the question is, are there any studies on whether some communities that are selling water to other communities are charging significantly different rates?
Yeah, so I think that's what I really wish I could rattle off the number of the state bill, but that's what that state bill, try to get that information out to you through CMAP, but that's what the state bill is really aimed at addressing. So we know there's lots of reasons that rates may vary, right? And so we know, different systems have different pipe sizes, different numbers of customers. So there's lots of reasons that rates may vary. What we don't really know is, and I'm not advocating for regulation, but as I mentioned, we don't have state regulation of our water systems. And so we don't really have a picture, our communities aren't going through any kind of rate review process. And so we have transparency through rate setting through city councils, but that's about it. So I think that that study is really going to be aimed at answering that question of what is actually driving those rate differentials across communities. And so hopefully, again, this work will be funded and we'll have an answer on that in the next year or two.
Thank you, Margaret. If we don't have any other questions, what you can do is send Margaret an email if you may have any follow-up questions that you weren't able to ask today. But we'll now move on to our second presentation. But again, Margaret, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our second presentation will be by CMAP staff Kelsey Pudlock, and she'll be talking about water supply planning. Kelsey?
Thanks, Michelle, and hello, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. So my name's Kelsey Pudlock. I'm an associate planner here at
Can we ask committee members to mute yourself, please? Thank you. We're hearing some background noise.
you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
So I am associate planner
Okay.
here at CMAP, and I'll be providing an overview of why it's important to integrate water supply and demand considerations into local plans, and then walk through how CMAP is putting this into practice through our local technical assistance program. So as we just heard from Margaret with water affordability, communities throughout the Chicago region are facing an array of water resources challenges. Despite our regional access to Lake Michigan, significant portions of the region rely on groundwater and are encountering water supply and quality issues. So by 2050, we anticipate that the demand for groundwater will exceed the supply found in both the shallow and sandstone aquifers within our region. And at the same time, we also anticipate a decline in water demand among communities getting their water from Lake Michigan. So this has some regional benefit, but it also presents its own set of challenges. Declining demand, for example, can mean less billed water per customer and therefore less revenue to cover the cost of maintaining water service. Overall, we expect these issues to grow unless certain actions are taken to coordinate and conserve our region's water supply. So in light of these challenges, ON2 2050 calls for an integrated approach to water resource management. So this is a regional goal to recognize value and manage water sustainably, and incorporating the water supply and demand into local planning is one strategy CMAP can take to work towards this goal. So next slide, please. And maybe one more. So we see this as a key step because understanding how planning decisions impact drinking water is essential for maintaining the region's long-term supply. Historically, water utilities have addressed drinking water issues, but the way we as planners plan and develop our communities really affects the quantity and quality of our water supply, the amount of water used, and the amount of infrastructure required to get water to residents. So I just want to take a look at each of these in a little more detail. Next slide, please. So development typically includes impervious surfaces that can reduce the groundwater's or the ground's infiltration capacity and instead generate runoff, and that runoff can carry pollutants like road salts and fertilizers and contaminate nearby streams or aquifers. So avoiding sensitive lands, protecting land or protecting natural areas, and using infill and redevelopment to accommodate growth are all important strategies that we can take in local plans to protect the quantity and quality of our water supply. So with regard to water use, certain land uses, building types, and development planners or development patterns consume more water than others. Development patterns also play a role in how we design and how we maintain infrastructure over time. So for example, community or compact development, in addition to water efficient plumbing or building and landscaping standards, can make it easier for residents to reduce water use. However, on the other end of the spectrum, large lots and more dispersed development patterns typically increase water use, as well as the length of pipes and other infrastructure, which can lead to higher long-term costs due to increased potential of water loss, replacement needs, and energy demands. The location of new development can influence costs as well. So a good example of this is infill development, which can improve the efficiency of the water system by increasing the customer base that helps maintain the existing infrastructure, whereas greenfield development requires new infrastructure and therefore adds to the system's overall long-term capital costs. Studies have also found that water efficient land use decisions and other conservation practices can also help reduce costs associated with expensive utility expansions that are often prompted by excess use. So the diagram here illustrates how an effective water conservation program can influence the time of infrastructure investment. So whether that be delaying when new expansion is needed or reaching a point where downsizing the infrastructure is the most sensible option. So, and all that these types of things help utilities save money. So to sum things up, if we're interested in seeing greater coordination and conservation of our region's water supply, we need to rethink how we're planning. So during a comprehensive planning process, future land use plan should be considering how proposed growth patterns could impact available supplies and infrastructure capacity, and then adjust policies accordingly. Planners and water utility managers also need to work together to align local planning efforts with current and future water supply constraints. So this may mean making sure that potential development generated from our potential demand generated by new development isn't detrimental to available supplies, or adjusting water rates to be more resilient to variability in water use. So next slide, please. So here's a look at some of the work that CMAP has been doing to ensure supply and demand information is being used to inform land use development and infrastructure investments throughout the region. So in 2018, we received funding from IDNR, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, to update the regional water demand forecasts and then develop municipal scale forecasts for communities. In 2019, IDNR funded a series of projects aimed at using the forecast to bolster CMAP's local planning efforts. So this included developing an approach for incorporating supply and demand into the local planning process, and then piloting the approach with 2 LTA projects. So we continue to continue doing these pilot projects, but we're still in the process of securing funding. So we're just keeping our fingers crossed on that one for now. In any case, the approach we developed considers water supply and demand at multiple phases of the planning process. Next slide, please. And with the majority of it being captured within the existing conditions, as well as the visioning and plan development phases. So within the existing conditions phase, planners should be conducting a source water assessment. So first identifying the water sources, and then taking a deeper look at water quality and quantity, as well as infrastructure and operations used to treat and distribute the water to the community. We recommend using regional and sub-regional studies to assess the sources quality and quantity, including CMAP's demand forecasts, which have some useful information with regard to historic use trends as well as the future trends. And then we found that it's best to reach out to the community or the utility themselves to gain insights on water service and supporting infrastructure. Then from there, planners should review conservation and demand measures based on the issues and priorities that have been identified within that water assessment. So from there, key findings should then be used in the visioning and plan development phase to inform future land use maps and create goals and recommendations that address the needs of the community, as well as aligning the water supply and quality strains that may be present. So this approach was applied to 2 comprehensive planning projects, one for the village of Burlington and the other for the village of Bonee. We strategically pick these communities because they rely on different water sources and are located in different parts of the region. We also thought it would be good to select projects that were led by staff as well as consultants to make sure that the approach is useful for both groups. Since the grant and the project timelines didn't quite match up as much as we would like, so 2 memos were prepared for each of these communities, one outlining key findings and the other outlining recommendations to be included in the land use map and the final plan. So both of the projects have yet to be completed, but I'll provide an overview of each. So this first one is Burlington. Burlington's a small community in Kane County that relies on groundwater from a combination of shallow and deep sandstone aquifers. Most of the community is on septic, and the primary land use in the area is agriculture. So both of these have potential to pollute the shallow aquifers in the area. So it's worth noting this because much of the land is moderately susceptible to groundwater contamination. And so in response, we recommended that the community apply agricultural best practices to minimize pollutants and runoff, as well as promote septic system maintenance and replacement. Many of the wells that reach the sandstone aquifers within the southwest portion of the region are at risk of running dry by 2030. However, Burlington's don't appear to be impacted by this trend. So that gives them a little bit of flexibility with regard to future growth. However, if they do decide to grow, we recommended that the village update its water utility forecast, reevaluate their water rate structure, and start conducting water loss audits to help improve their distribution system overall. And most importantly, with future growth being of interest, we also recommended that promoting the use of compact and low impact development. So the second pilot project we worked on was Moni. Moni is a slightly larger community in Will County and relies solely on shallow aquifers for their water supply. So the village has a mix of land uses ranging from agriculture to commercial as well as industrial and manufacturing. Overall, we found that the water distribution system was in pretty good shape, and they had recently taken on a handful of projects aimed at modernizing the system as well as preparing for emergencies such as future drought. So we did find, though, that the village uses a declining block rate structure, which typically doesn't encourage customers to conserve water, nor does it generate the adequate revenue relative to water consumption. So we did recommend that the village conduct a cost of rate study to ensure the rates promote conservation, affordability, and provide some financial security for the utility overall. With regards to water quality, the southwest portion of the planning area is vulnerable to contamination. So a handful of roads in this area are run through this area as well. So we made a handful of protection recommendations. So measures to promote sensible salting, agricultural best management practices, and then again, promoting the use of compact and low impact development. So Moni is a little further along than Burlington at the moment. So the next slide, please. Here's an example of the future land use map that's being drafted, and it highlights some of these recommendations and how they're getting reflected in planning for their future. So in the southwest corner of this map, you'll see that there are some waterways that have been buffered. So these are protection areas that have been placed around them and their floodplains to minimize development. And then in the northwest area, it was previously considered to be single family, and then industrial use is sprawling into the west. So instead, you can see that there is low impact residential development being recommended here, and incorporating conservation design aspects into that. And then the industrial uses are more or less confined to the I-57 corridor that runs through the planning area. There's also some compact development going on in the town center with a combination of multifamily, residential, and commercial mixed uses. So this is just a couple of or two examples of how we're incorporating water supply and demand considerations into planning. So with that, next slide, please. I'd just like to point out that we certainly want to continue testing out this approach through pilot projects, and if we're able to secure funding, we want to develop 3 more comprehensive plans in Hickory Hill, Sugar Grove, and Manuka following this approach. And once we get a few more projects done, we'll certainly want to report out on how things went, receive feedback, and eventually revise the approach to a point that it becomes standard practice across the LTA program. So with that, that's all I have today. So depending on how much time we have, I'm happy to answer some questions now. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. Yes, we do have time for questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself.
There's a question in the chat from Daniel. And I just saw you updated it too. Daniel, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, you know, one of the things I've noticed, and it's been documented in various local news sources the last few years, you know, potable water, affordable water is great. It's very important, as we all agree. It seems like some areas are preparing for droughts, and then other areas have sort of more water than we know what to do with. It could be, you know, a byproduct of climate change or just rising water tables. I'm really curious if there is an intersection of the two, and if so, you know, and again, this might not be the right, not venue, but the right study to launch this sort of discussion. But I'm kind of curious how if the two intersect, how they intersect, sort of more of a general question versus a more specific question related to the study, which was very well done and documented, I want to say. So, sorry, that was just kind of a rambling way of asking a question that might not even be related. So I apologize.
Thanks, Daniel. I would say that, you know, there is some relationship here. I mentioned early on that with development, we are creating a lot of impervious surfaces, and with that, there's a lot of runoff that's generated from it. And so with more development, we're seeing that contributing to flooding, particularly within urban areas. And at the same time, if the ground were not developed, it would allow for infiltration. And in some areas, that infiltration is critical for recharging aquifers, particularly shallow aquifers. So there is a tie to supply here.
That makes sense. More buildings, more development, less room for aquifers.
I just want to inject on that. I wonder if historically we've seen significant improvement or not based upon the development of engineering as the development of the suburbs has evolved with detention and retention basins and so forth as part of the planning process. Have we seen that has had a major impact, or do we still have lots to learn to deal with this issue, if anybody knows?
I think from a stormwater management perspective, yes, what has been being done in suburbs with regard to detention basins and different infrastructure to better capture stormwater and prevent flooding has been improving, and it is making a difference. And with that too, I think something that we need to work on is maintaining them so that they continue to function in their capacity that they are initially built and designed to provide. So yeah, I think it all is helping with regard to stormwater management.
I want to bring up out in McHenry County, we saw it more living out here, but you started to see these little boxes at different parks and such with a little satellite antenna on there and a solar panel. And basically they're these groundwater monitoring wells. So I was just Googling this. I'm going to share this link. It's actually pretty interesting. from the USGS. So these are groundwater monitoring wells, and in McHenry County, there's something close to 40 of them that the county groundwater management department or division partnered with the State Geological Survey and USGS. And at any rate, if you ever look at these links, and there's some other counties here in the state listed as well, it's pretty fascinating how dramatic the swings can be after a heavy rain event or in the midst of a drier period. And so one, you can look at the levels, you know, how far deep do you have to go before that water's there? And you can realize how truly sensitive some of these places are. It rains at 2 o'clock, and at 4 o'clock, you know, 2 hours later, there might be some of these wells where the water dramatically increases. So very interesting, again, the sensitivity of some of the areas. The other thing that I'm going to link here is some of, I think to Elliot's point, some of the learnings that they've had. And one of the things that it talks about too is the, you know, the chlorides and salt that we use in the winter and how that has an effect. And again, getting into the groundwater. But in my work, my regular job, I've got experiences with urban environments where they're restoring old steam tunnels or different tunnels beneath the ground, like in the middle of Chicago, in the middle of Milwaukee, these old tunnels. And a lot of those places, the infrastructure is in part suffering because of the chlorides used in the ground, in the salt. So not just an issue with our groundwater, but also the infrastructure. So all that snow melt and such permeates through, you know, areas in the streets and ends up going in and has an effect in a lot of ways negative on a lot of that stuff. So anyway, just interesting things. And again, one snippet of perspective there.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And I would also point to that it's good to remember that that variability that is seen with storms and the monitoring wells in McHenry County are likely a reflection on the shallow aquifers, but the recharge of the deep sandstone aquifer takes a lot more time and probably you know, it's continuing doing that over centuries. And so really we need to think about all of the aquifers within our region and how to essentially ensure that they can provide water for the whole region, for those that may only depend on the sandstone versus those that depend on the shallow.
Kelsey, we actually have another question in the chat box. So the question is whether or not you've coordinated at all with the Fox River Study Group, and I believe it's Geosyntech, about modeling the effect of land use on non-point pollution of surface waters.
Yes, so I would say CMAP also works on watershed planning, and Geosyntech and the Fox River Study Group are two partners that we are working with right now on a plan for the Indian Creek watershed, which is within the Fox River Basin. And yeah, we're working with them to model non-point source pollution throughout that watershed and trying to incorporate that into the watershed plan and the recommendations we make for improving water quality overall.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelsey. If there are other questions for Kelsey, you're welcome to email her. Her email address is on the slide in front of you. We'll now then move on to our next presentation. Again, Kelsey, thank you for joining us. This is incredibly informative.
Thanks.
So now we'll move into our third presentation for today by Dominic Argumedo on the Robbins Plan.
Thank you, Michelle, for that introduction. I appreciate it. Hello to members of the committee. My name is Dominic Argumedo. I'm a senior planner here with CMAP, and I'm the project manager for the Robbins LTA plan. I'm coming to you today from my wife's office, and my colleague Dustin, just so he's not surprised when two kids or two dogs are walking in, which is typical of what happens when we're talking. So thanks for the time to be here. Just to give some background on Robbins. Robbins, we have 284 communities here in the 7-county area, so not everybody knows where Robbins is. If you can see on this slide, it's that red portion, and it's in South Cook County. It has a population of approximately 5,300, with 95% of the residents being Black. It has one metro stop, Robbins Station, and it does face economic challenges. 35% live below the poverty line. The median family income is $27,000 and unemployment is 23%. With all these challenges, and the community has a variety of pride, it's to work to strengthen their community. So that there's been no shortage of plans over the last 20 years in Robbins. There's been a corridor plan, there's been a pedestrian access improvement plan, there's been an economic development vision, there's been a comprehensive plan, a brownfield study, and an overall redevelopment strategy. So let's look at the why. 2 whys. 1, why will this plan work, which is different? And why is this subject even on this agenda dealing with water? So there's 2 things here. Both answers that is the Robbins Park, which is coming in 2022. That's going to be a 52-acre MWRD stormwater management facility. And it features a retention lake surrounded by 30 acres of parkland. And why that's important is this stormwater management facility is eventually that's going to take care of 80% of the land vacancy near the metro station. Now, I actually heard of this project before I got to CMAP. I heard it, I've been at CMAP since February 2010, and I actually heard of this project on an APA podcast and hearing somebody from MWRD talking about they could have just built a stormwater management facility to take care of the flooding, but they decided to look further than that. How can it be integrated into the community? How can it be more than just a stormwater management facility? And how can it assist in overall planning efforts? Let's look at the next slide to show you what kind of difference it will make. If you can see that green outline is where Robbins Park will go. On the left of your screen, yeah, you'll see right below it, all that water of that green park, and that's right near the metro station. So that's why 80% of the land near the metro station is vacant. With the park going in, you can see how much it's going to take care of that flooding overwall into the floodplain, and it's going to deal with it. So it's really going to make a difference. This is prime land that's vacant, that's right near the metro station. So this is going to be a tangible spark that's going to provide true change. The past plans, while they were done with the best intentions, they required some sort of political will to get this done. This park going in is going to have shovels in the ground. There's going to be various milestones. The shovels going into the ground, construction, ribbon cutting. The people in the community are going to see something that's going to change. So what's going to actually happen? How can the community actually capitalize on that? And if you see that the graphic right there, we have a great transit-oriented development area within a quarter mile of the station, going to a mile. It still covers much of Robbins, and that's why we want to capitalize on this plan. So the plan itself is a partnership between the Chicago CMAP, the RTA, and the Village of Robbins, of course. And there's going to be recommendations focused on 4 areas: housing, transportation, economic development, and an industrial focus, which I'll talk about in a minute. So let's talk about some of these recommendations. Be ready to shine the spotlight. There's lots to do before 2022 when the park originally is going to open. So like that graphic showed, the floodplain is going to be taken care of. But that doesn't mean somebody can come in and just build there. You're going to need to do some of the non-glamorous work. Zoning's got to be updated. Right now, all the area around the metro station is kind of zoned industrial. Well, the community really wants to have a lot of residential and mixed use and businesses that cater to retail services. So you need to update the zoning to get what you want right there. Land assembly. This is an area that developers there's a natural inclination for developers not to go into areas where they previously have worked. So you want to remove those artificial hurdles. One of that is through land assembly, and the village owns a lot of this vacant property right now. If they can continue to build, buy up these parcels and assemble land in these larger parcels, they can turn it over to a developer and say, there's no middle person needed. This is what the zoning is. This is what we would like you to build. This is where you can build it. You can go. Infrastructure. Again, the floodplain is going to be taken care of, but there's going to be a need for other types of infrastructure, such as sewer updating and other stormwater aspects, those sewer types of infrastructure to support forthcoming residential development. And in the interim, between that, you're going to be able to use some interim land uses. There's talk of using urban agriculture in these areas, or community gardens, something to show the community that this land is now available, it's being used while we transfer to larger projects right there. So those are some of the recommendations. And then building off of that, once we've done that before 2022, you want to say and sell your vision. One of the things that Robbins is going to be looking to do once they've done this work is to go to the developers or go to people who are looking to invest and tell them what their vision is. Perhaps by posting an RFP, a request for proposal, a request for qualification on their site. I come to CMAP having worked in previous municipalities, and I've seen this succeed where the municipality owns a parcel of land and they announce to developers what they want in an RFP. If you come in and you build this type of development, you will be able to get approved in such and such in time, and we will work with you to get that done. So you have to not just assume that the developer knows that, but that you've told them that. Go to developers. There's a variety of trade shows that are in the area that Robbins, from speaking with the administration, is not really aware of, that other communities in South Cook County have been attending. So we want to attend those to network and start talking to developers. These are low investment, but you're able to still meet developers. When I first asked about trade shows with the community of Robbins, the administrator was like, "You mean the one in Vegas?" And we're like, "We don't have to go to Vegas. We can go to Navy Pier." And I think that's little things like that to network, to be able to tell developers where you want to go and amplify your story. The website, Robbins, from all these plans that I previously mentioned, they, Robbins, from all the plans I've worked with, always talked about how this had a good story for businesses. It's near the highway. It's near a channel where you could bring in barges. It has people that want to work. It has available land, but that's missing on the website. So you want to be able to amplify your story and tell people what is great about your community and why you should invest in it. And that's something we're going to be working on with the community as well. Because of the park coming in, we're looking to build off of that park. Now, we talked about the primary area near the train station with the transit-oriented development, but that can further lead to economic development, reinvesting in corridors. When residents of Robbins talked about their community 30 years ago or 40 years ago, they talked about how their community was so vibrant in terms of people. You had a lot of.
There's a house here in Andover on Alderbrook Road.
Faye, sorry, we can hear you.
No problem. And then you're able to invest in the community because you can see where that park will fit into the area of Robbins, where you have the primary area to the south. And even there's an industrial development focus area that is just to the west, which is a former power plant that's on looking to be redeveloped as well. So this is looking to be a linchpin for development in Robbins. But it's all because MWRD work with the community to not just build a stormwater management facility, but to build a stormwater management facility and park that could be that could help the community to have an asset. And with that, we'll have time to implement before that park comes in 2022. There's a lot of time. If we could have the next slide. There's time to do that. the zoning adjustments, the infrastructure adjustments. It's time to be ready and time to adjust. And I think that that can happen. And this is Robin's native, Nichelle Nichols, who of course we all know as Commander Uhura from Star Trek. And I think if we can work toward this, we can all have a chance to live long and prosper in that community right there. So I thank you. We're going to be, I'm going to be working with Robbins over the next 10 months as part of an embedded staff planner. And I'm very excited about that because I helped to get with the community and RTA to conceive this plan. But I think one of the things is to implement a plan. So I'll be working with the community to do those zoning changes, to apply for those grants for the infrastructure, to work to draw up an RFP or RFQ and work in partnership, continuing with MWRD to get this over the goal line. So it's a very exciting project and we look forward to moving forward with it. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dominic. This is incredibly interesting. We do have a few minutes for questions. Do we have any questions for Dominic?
Not a question. One of the things that we've seen more and more of happening in the city is promoted by various aldermen and other parties is the use of participatory budgeting. You know, you kind of have a blank slate here, and a good way to engage local residents and even businesses is to, you know, gather ideas through some sort of, I don't know, maybe community meetings or online form submission, and then have, you know, if there's money when it comes to, you know, some of the specific park features, you know, to put it up as part of a participatory budgeting process. I mean, that could be a good way to get more eyeballs on it, some more buzz, but also community engagement.
That's definitely looking forward to continue to engage the community. I think the budget, you know, it's interesting about participatory budgeting as we move forward, especially with the budget crunch that's going to happen because of the past year. It's going to be interesting to see where priorities for community fall. I think it's very important for the public to be involved. It's a great point.
If there are no other questions for Dominic, you're welcome again to email him. His email address is right in front of you. Dominic, thank you again for your time. And we'll now move on to our discussion, which is the next slide. So for about 10 minutes, myself and Dustin will be in 2 breakout rooms discussing maybe any comments you have from today's presentations or maybe any feedback you may have. So we will launch the breakout room shortly. And again, we'll be here for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back to the main room for public comment and adjournment.
Before we do, I just wanted to throw something out of concern in light of what we're facing as a region, as a community. Obviously, our whole transportation system is in dire straits. And I'm very, very concerned about what it's going to take to get it become operational again, and getting people using it and feeling comfortable using it. So I was hoping that maybe something that we could explore as a committee, and I think is worthy of focus, you know, within CMAP generally, is trying to figure out some way to put some type of project together or initiate some type of regional project to basically restore to talk about what we need to do to restore confidence, what we need to do to get people utilizing transit throughout the region. I think it's a major concern. I know maybe Aaron has some ideas on this. I don't know, but I think it's something worthy of CMAP getting involved in. And there's probably things that we're going to be talking about on a national level, but I think we need to be talking about what we can do in our metro region to try and figure out what we can do to restore confidence and getting people comfortable riding transit again, whether it be free fares, whether it be other things that trying to get people back on transit. And I think it's a major concern. I just wanted to throw that out. Because I think it's something that possibly this committee, it might be a worthy thing to sort of explore as a project throughout the region, because it will need outreach. It will need to touch people, whether it be public service announcements, whether it be an education campaign, whatever it is. But I thought it was important enough that I just wanted to throw it out there before we go and talk about the things which were very valuable that we talked about today.
Well, Elliot, and hi to all the committee members. I'm Erin Alaman, Executive Director, and lurking around the committee meetings today, trying to get a couple other things done at the same time. You raise a very important point, Elliot, is that, it's critical for us to be thinking about the future of mobility and especially transit in our region. So your comments are very timely. We, at the last board meeting, approved a contract with a consultant to assist us in thinking through sort of what are the strategies and tactics we need to take on as a region in the near term to make sure that transit is solvent moving forward, because with 800, prior to COVID, about 800,000 trips on a daily basis, so average workday basis, were, around our region on transit. And, more and more, those trips aren't going directly to the central business district. And so if you think about the unpredictability of travel on our roads right now, and then think about adding 800,000 more people traveling, in single occupancy vehicles, that's a disaster scenario, or Carmageddon, as some people have said. And so we want to proactively work with the Regional Transportation Authority and all of our transit partners to address just that. So we'll be talking about this with our board in January and the MPO Policy Committee in January as well. And we'd love to engage this committee and you all in terms of how we talk about this moving forward, and what are those strategies that we need to do to not only build confidence in transit back, but just make sure that this region functions economically as well, and transit's a critical component to it.
Yeah, a couple of quick thoughts on it. From what I'm hearing, and as I work as a management consultant, I'm hearing that clients and offices really aren't planning for people to come in until like 2022. I travel. I've done the whole sort of weekly travel thing. Clients don't even want people sniffing around their offices until then. I know footprints in major downtown areas are shrinking as people start to work remotely. I mean, there's definitely a risk there when it comes to, or there will definitely, I think, be some long-term effects from this, after everything, quote unquote, returns to normal. One thing I would caution against, though, I know it's important to sort of promote transit use, economic growth, everything like that. But, I think we've proven in this country, unfortunately, that, as a whole, a lot of folks aren't necessarily willing to do the hard work to actually get things under control. So I just want to balance, there should be a balance of, yes, economic growth is important, but just with the sensitivity that we need to get this thing under control first. And, now they're saying vaccines aren't going to be out until like at least June of next year for most people. So, I mean, if it's a longer term body of research that comes out sort of after that, or even sort of close to it, I would just be sensitive to putting out that sort of messaging like too soon, if it makes sense.
I understand what you're saying. My point is not necessarily, we're not going to encourage people to do it tomorrow, because people aren't going to do it tomorrow. Also, I think we're going to see a new normal after, as an aftermath to COVID. I think we're going to see a lot more people not working in the center city. You're going to see a lot more people working from home. You're going to see a lot more of that, and a lot of businesses are going to find, well, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. We don't need all this space. There's a way for us to operate more productively and profitably by letting people do a lot of the work that they do from home or from some other type of location. So I think that's part of that's part of whatever we do in terms of the strategic planning, is trying to evaluate and study and survey what we think is going to be the new norm as we evolve from COVID. It's going to be different. It's never, I don't, quite frankly, I don't think it's ever going to be the same. It's going to be something different. And we have to sort of figure out what that's going to be. But we got to make sure people are able to get where they're going when they need to get there, and so on and so forth. So I think that's part of the whole process.
I'll
Yeah,
just add
no, I
one
think
specific.
it'll be interesting research for sure.
So this is less focused on sort of a long-term research project and more focused on what are the policy levers that need to change. So I think a good example to make this work a little bit more tangible is to think about how we fund transit. Transit has traditionally, maybe a decade or over a decade ago, they used to get operating subsidies from their federal dollars that they get to all of the regions across the region. And right now they only get capital infrastructure. So thinking about sort of what the percentage of fare box, right, people who pay it to get on the bus recovery is in that formula that funds transit, or thinking about how, we could better utilize buses and trains to, we have so much data and information about where people are going and where jobs are and where educational attainment levels are and people are living. How can we sort of rethink how the transit system operates and fix some of those problems that were there prior to COVID, as well as looking at, curb space allocation, because we've seen a whole bunch of stuff accelerated that we think, is here to stay. So again, a little bit less of a long-term research project and more, how do we, use this opportunity to fix those things that we know are challenges, including some of the things like, the equity of fare cards, right? That I could buy a $100 card today and it's not a big deal for me, but that we make our most vulnerable populations pay out of their pocket. And sometimes they pay more than $100 a month because they can't afford that $100 fee right up front when,
Equity clearly has to be a big part of the picture, and how we inject equity into the system.
To butt in here, but we're excited about this work, and we will bring more feedback. And maybe that's a good note for the committee liaisons. To the next meeting should be focused on some of this transportation mobility stuff to get your feedback. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Erin, thank you for your time and to speaking to our committee about the work that CMAP is undergoing related to the mobility recovery work. We actually hope to have 10 minutes to go into discussion, but we are actually almost out of time. But again, this conversation was incredibly informative. Clearly, there is an interest in knowing more about the mobility work we're doing. So for our next meeting, hopefully we'll have more to talk about related to that work. So we'll now move into the public comment. If there are any comments from committee members, feel free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hey. Yes, this is Heather Armstrong, and have you guys seen the documentary about the Great Lakes? Because they're hosted it by ABC7, and that's pretty interesting. Another thing I have is have a concern about the Great Lakes and how it's going to be overflowing onto Lakeshore Drive.
Heather, can you share the link to perhaps maybe the documentary, or if there's an article that talks about the documentary, maybe you can add that to the chat?
Okay, I'll try to find it. I know if you go on ABC7 Chicago, you can easily do it, but I don't know how to do it to the chat.
That's all right. We'll look for that. Thank you.
Because I've shared it onto Facebook about it.
Perfect. And it's so great to hear from you. I hope Iowa, I believe you're in Iowa. Is that correct, Heather?
Not yet.
Ah, okay,
We're,
okay, almost.
we're having problems. We're getting the voucher.
Well, are there any, thank you, Heather, for your comments. Are there any other public comments?
Happy New Year to you. It's Garland Armstrong. And what my wife is saying, make sure about for the Great Lakes. And I think sometimes with the disability people who sometimes individually going down there, they need to be aware of sometimes with the flooding, sometimes when they're taking a little stroll down there, they need to watch out because they don't know when the current will strike them and how to be extremely well prepared for it if they're going to go by themselves alone or with a partner. So they need to know what to do, how to, if they're, once they're closer by to it, like, you know, like where bicycle riders and then they're walking or someone pushing, they need to be watching out for the currents when they're coming right into it. So they don't know what to do or how to be well prepared for it. So I think we need to educate it for the disability community so they can be extremely well prepared because they're not prepared for this because no one has never taught them in the disability organization or disability community saying what to do if we decide to go by ourselves alone, even without social distancing. But here, all of a sudden, here comes a flood and what to do next. So they have no idea and no planning on what to do. So they feel like they're out of touch and they just feel like they're caught in the middle. So we need to get a strategic plan and get this one extremely well prepared so that it won't happen down the road. So we can say we should have a backup plan. That's what the problem is. Most people don't have backup plans. So that's what the time is right now for us to set up a backup plan for this.
Thank you, Garland. Thank you, Heather. It's great to hear from both of you. Thank you for your input.
Our pleasure. My pleasure.
Our pleasure.
Quickly before we adjourn, I do actually want to circle back to the roll call. I know some members joined after we started, but I just want to get the minutes approved and to confirm you are here. So if you would indulge me for a few moments, I'm just going to read out a few more names. Lulu Blacksmith, Blake Grisby, Stephanie Pressler, Ruth Rosas.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, and just yay, nay on the September 8th committee meeting minutes?
Yay.
Okay, thank you. And then Ben Rulig. Okay, thank you, Ruth. All right, so we are actually at 3:30, and so we'll now adjourn. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, March 9th, 2 to 3:30 p.m. And again, please look for a Zoom invitation shortly.
Good to see you all. I wish you all a very happy holidays and a happy new year.
You too, everybody.
Wishing everybody the best.
You too. And then Heather's birthday is coming up fast on New Year's Day.
Happy early birthday.
Early birthday.
Everybody stay safe, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.